Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post about physics culture. It's called Another Black Cloud Approaches. Back in 1954, 1 year before Fred Hoyle wrote the science fiction classic, The Black Cloud, the genre of hard science fiction or speculative fiction had yet to be invented. The debate between Big Bang cosmology and steady-state cosmology was in its infancy. The thermonuclear blast at Bikini Atoll had yet to transform the physics community. Almost 70 years later, we are still stuck in the debates that Fred Hoyle popularized, and still entangled in the conflations they conjured. Looking back, we can see how, before hard science fiction and speculative fiction, the line dividing fantasy and reality was sharper. Before modern physics, the line dividing particles and waves, matter and light, space and time were clear. Before the blast at Bikini Atoll, physicists could still see how to transform between relative and absolute perspectives, looking at systems from within and without, and not getting confused about what perspective they were taking. But something about the thermonuclear explosion terrified the physics community and stopped British physicist Fred Hoyle in his tracks, causing him to take a step back from academia and become a novelist. That something is difficult to find within history books, but in retrospect, at that moment in time, the physics community decided to embrace mysteries, conflations, and confusion within the narratives they would pass down to the next generation. In some way, Hoyle's novel was his last stand against this trend. Pedagogy is based on compelling stories, and around this time, physics educators and popular science publications embraced the idea that the incompatibility of classical gravity and quantum mechanics was mysterious and in need of a hero to sort out. Ever since then, curious young men and women have been roped into spending their youths on heroic fantasies in which they unravel the mystery and save the day, just like the heroic bomb builders of the Manhattan Project. Those who figure out how this false dichotomy and false puzzle was constructed will slowly back away from the discipline of physics and try to find something better to do before they get sucked into one of the publicly funded time sinks in government-funded research labs. These people might keep their mouths shut about the scam because they see that if young people are kept busy on peaceful physics experiments, they won't have enough time to build more weapons. However, given the levels of funding allocated to military research, this was a rather hopeful and naive perspective on the part of the physicists. This hope is something that Hoyle struggled with in his novel as he analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of scientists and the political apparatus charged with controlling them. From an academic standpoint, we see that instructing students in conflated concepts weakened their ability to shift their perspective from within to without. Instead of trying to visualize and understand the system they were describing, they were encouraged to shut up and calculate. If the math worked out, that meant that they understood the system, even when they didn't understand the perspective they were using. Conflation created useful approximations that made some mathematical calculations easier, but many students confused these mental shortcuts for a true description of reality itself. And while one might think that this corruption of thinking ability would remain unique to the physics community, over the years it has bled out into many other critical disciplines and spread confusion far and wide. Fred Hoyle's classic hard science fiction novel was written in a time before this confusion had taken hold, but it predicted the consequences through the destruction of a physicist's mind when he attempts to think in two incompatible languages at the same time. The implication is that health is only possible if one only looks at one language at a time and deliberately forgets the incompatible language whenever necessary. I've wondered if this notion stems from World War I psychotherapist Wilfred Bion and his belief that mental health depends on the necessity of making the mind's eye blind to contradictory information. In his experience, traumatized war veterans needed to make themselves blind to the moral ambiguity of what they had done, or else suffer from permanent mental torment. Given the trauma of nuclear tests, one might wonder if post-World War II physicists assumed a similarly blind attitude towards inconsistencies large and small. Since I don't have trouble simultaneously visualizing contradictory concepts, I wonder if the necessity of compartmentalization depends on membership in a majority or minority group. After all, each mind only has a limited amount of neuroplasticity to deal with cognitive dissonance, and those who grew up with the sense that they are outsiders carry an additional cognitive load that requires them to habitually view themselves from two sets of eyes. For example, a black person would need to constantly imagine how they look to black and white people, and these images will be very different. Someone from a majority group doesn't have to do this constant comparison, and this may affect his ability to visualize two perspectives about a physical system. Trauma must also fundamentally change how a person approaches the study of physics or philosophy. A trauma might completely split a person's mind and prevent them from seeing an entire system of thought as it gets pushed down into a protected, unconscious part of their mind. The arrival of the nuclear age was certainly terrifying, and it must have brought about a fundamental mental split among those who grew up in its shadow. When such a split is deep enough, it is impossible to bridge the gap between two perspectives about a physical system. What are these two perspectives that I keep mentioning but never defining? Fundamentally, they are perspectives from within a system and from without. For example, a quantum system appears completely uncertain and unpredictable unless it is viewed as a subcomponent of a more dynamic oscillating substrate. Another example is how a relativistic system appears to have strange properties unless viewed as an approximation or subcomponent of a more absolute system. So, on a fundamental level, the lesson that you require to think about things in two different languages at the same time, you have to have absorbed object permanence from your mother by playing peekaboo, and you also have to be able to understand the difference between symmetry and anti-symmetry. So just imagining how that will repel and attract two objects together. Instead of explaining away the uncertainty of the quantum realm or the strange properties of relativity, the physics community used these mysterious properties to market their discipline to the sorts of people who couldn't understand how to solve problems by looking outside of the box that defines the problem. In short, they selected only students who suffered from compartmentalized thinking and an inability to shift their perspective. They told these students that if they understood the math, they understood the puzzle. One might think that these silly compartmentalizing mental habits of physicists have little impact on how people think about other matters. But when morality and health are viewed through a relativistic lens, many people are made blind to the existence of an absolute which can be imagined but never directly measured. Thus we all lose our heads in the physicists' relativistic nuclear mushroom clouds, and lose our contact with the ground. Before the modern age, people maintained their connection to the absolute through a grounding in sacred space, as in a church. But scientists, like those in Hoyle's novel, have told us that we don't need those spaces, because science has all of the answers. This was a tragedy, because when we lost our connection to communal sacred spaces, we began to worship homes, books, movies, workplaces, and internet games. Amid an onslaught of technology that grows ever more aggressive in its demands for our attention, we experience a growing need for protected, sacred spaces where we can reaffirm an attachment to an absolute frame of reference through an act of mind-expanding imagination that is commonly known as faith. In contrast, the scientists in Hoyle's novel adopted the viewpoint that the notion of a larger, absolute, godlike form of intelligence is beyond our purview, since we can never directly observe such an intelligence without dying. Those who absorbed that viewpoint have shaped our modern lifestyles and brought the progress in human understanding to a standstill in the realms of philosophy and physics, conflating concepts that should be best understood in their own contexts. When you mix contexts, you deprive the original language of its power. It's a way of destroying a language. For example, if you have a New Age community that starts misusing well-defined physics terms, you can truly, within a generation, completely deprive those people of being able to understand older literature, because the meanings of the words have been corrupted. So, those who absorbed that viewpoint, I'll start back. The scientists in Hoyle's novel adopted the viewpoint that the notion of a larger, absolute, godlike form of intelligence is beyond our purview, since we can never directly observe such an intelligence without dying. Those who absorbed that viewpoint have shaped our modern lifestyles and brought the progress in human understanding to a standstill in the realms of philosophy and physics. This is not surprising, since progress has always depended on leaps of faith and imagination. This situation leads to the irony that while applications of communication technology have blossomed, fundamental physics and philosophy remained in a standstill, preserved as a cipher that only a few people ever sort out. Those people tend to be the ones who've had the luxury of a quiet space to think for themselves, without constant intrusion from teachers and bosses. Independent, non-academic writers are people who have given themselves a quiet, sacred space to think, to create without intrusion, and they are still the people with the power to instigate progress, often through non-standard communication methods like science fiction or popular science or even spiritual writings. When it comes to the power of science to change our lives, popular science explores our hopes, while science fiction quarantines our fears. Hard science fiction and speculative fiction blur the lines between these two realms, creating a potent and disturbing mixture of fantasy and reality that stretch our sense of the limits of possibility. And I don't think that this blurring is very good for our mental health. This makes the genre unnervingly powerful, and if there is anything that politicians hate, it is power that is not within their grasp. Hoyle's novel is highly political in a way that most scientists today would be too afraid to attempt. In some ways, his novel is a threat to those who seek answers to questions that should not concern them. In other ways, it serves as a cautionary tale about a man who dreamed of upending old power structures and placing scientists at the top of the hierarchy. He ended up getting his brain fried by a reach for knowledge that was not meant for him. In modern parlance, hubris and cognitive dissonance killed him, and such a threat remains alive and well for scientists today. By looking at those who have used Hoyle's themes in more recent works of science fiction, one can see some evolution in how we treat those who quest for greater knowledge. We have Fred Hoyle's book, The Black Cloud, from 1957, in which communication with the alien is established via radio waves. The alien is an atheist and a paragon of rationality. Volunteer test subjects are killed by the alien language and silenced. Close Encounters by Steven Spielberg in 1977. We saw communication with the alien is established via music. The alien inspires ecstatic wonder but doesn't say very much. Kidnapped test subjects are released, but they don't have much to say. Contact by Carl Sagan from 1985. We saw communication with the alien established via a gigantic, expensive apparatus. The alien provides a vague, religious experience that addresses the protagonist's daddy issues. The test subject survives with her memory intact, but she didn't learn very much. Next, we have Arrival by Ted Chiang from 1998, in which the communication with the alien was established by a new language. The alien makes people believe in their visions or memories of the future. The innocent test subject lives out her life, knowing that her fate is to die prematurely. This evolution makes me think of our comfort with widespread knowledge of the basic truths of physics and philosophy. I believe that in the aftermath of the nuclear explosion at Bikini Atoll, physicists became terrified that if people understood physics and philosophy as they understood it, the world would end. Some sort of psychic fragmentation, which I think takes the ideas from physics way too far. So a lot of these ideas about an individual having power to change their reality, it should be understood in a metaphorical context, not literally. So it's true that when we dream, we can imagine a whole world, but our dreams are limited. We may think they're unlimited, but they really are limited. One human mind is not capable of creating an entire world. We are not gods. Collectively, we create the world we live in because we change it by our behavior. But humans alone are not the only ones who create the world in this sense. I mean, there are plants, animals, everything. So I find the idea that physics gives us all of the answers by telling us that we are some sort of like mystically powerful beings. I prefer the older religions. They don't overcomplicate things, and they have their own metaphorical beauty that should be understood within the historical context. A lot of the new interpretations of physics language, applying it to spirituality, it seems more like an attempt to corrupt the meaning of and conflate the meaning of words rather than any kind of true progress. It seems really like a mass confusion rather than clarification. So that's my personal opinion, but everyone has their own way of dealing with the human condition. So, let's see. So this evolution of thought makes me think of our comfort with widespread knowledge of the basic truths of physics and philosophy. I believe that in the aftermath of the nuclear explosion at Bikini Atoll, physicists became terrified that if people understood physics and philosophy as they understood it, the world would end. Perhaps they responded to this fear by deliberately corrupting physics heuristics and pedagogy so that the curriculum only selected for the most myopic, compartmentalized individuals. I'm sure that's a very insulting thing to say, but these people, I don't think that they lacked the capability to be non-compartmentalized. I believe that their educations encouraged those aspects of their mind to an unhealthy degree. So today, perhaps one might find more people who are comfortable with the idea that the future has a degree of classical predictability, and that people won't necessarily lose their minds if they understand that it is not humanity's fate for things to always get better all of the time. Metaphorical black clouds come and go, and civilization can and does regress at times. But that doesn't mean that the end of the world has arrived. It is just a natural, cyclical process that we need to ride out together. And I think that is why I like Fred Hoyle's book and think it is a good time to dust it off and bring it back out into the open. This natural, cyclical process can only be seen clearly if one develops comfort with both the language of modern physics and classical physics. The truth is not contained in one or the other, it is contained in both. And to see that, one must become comfortable with looking at systems from within and without, while comparing and contrasting incompatible and independent languages that are built up from different definitions of concepts like space and time, and that use different approximations. So don't confuse literal and figurative things, because if you try to approximate your mind as a quantum computer, you become a sort of God, which is physics that should tell you that the physics used to describe that system has used an approximation, not that the physics has shown you that you're a God. Yeah? All right. So these are things that students of literature do all of the time, these sorts of mental perspective shiftings and approximations, but they are things that students of physics and philosophy these days, this sort of analytical philosophy, they're discouraged from attempting. They're encouraged more to sort of fall in love with these mathematical approximations without necessarily thinking too much about the approximations that are being made. The traumatized physics mind of 1957 could not cope with the cognitive dissonance created by thinking in two incompatible languages at once. But by 1998, more people were ready to see that the language one uses can expand one's understanding of their life's possibilities. For me, this served as an Orwellian reminder that when we give away the control of our language to an entertainment or educational apparatus, we constrain what we can imagine. This constraint is something that those who engineer monolithic control enjoy, but it isn't necessarily good for the robustness and stability and mental health of the system as a whole. Thus, to maintain the tradition of rehashing Fred Hoyle's classic tale of the black cloud and releasing the power and danger of imagination, I give you the Promethean Dialogues, written in 2020. It is a satire I wrote of the black cloud, in which, well, I won't give away spoilers, but in this book I would like to place my satire alongside a dramatically abridged, snappier version of Hoyle's classic, so that the stories can be easily digested at the same time. I'd follow this up with a light-hearted physics lesson about how perception of the Big Bang versus steady-state universe debates has changed over the past 70 years. For this book to happen, I need to secure a Creative Commons license from Hoyle's estate. Wish me luck. So I guess I can read a bit of it. Chapter 1. Protagora had been in a coma for years after a bicycle ride sent her spinning head over heels into a parked car. Without connection to the world around her, her mental days and nights were a walk in clouds lit up by lightning strikes in the night sky of her dreams. As her mind wandered, her body slowly rotated in a homedic life support machine. This passive consciousness made her similar to the black cosmic clouds of gas which wandered the universe. As in her mind, a cloud would light up in a fractal lightning strike pattern of connectivity as a cosmic ray shot through its core. Each strike formed a thought and pushed the cloud's constituent particles into a new, more ordered pattern composing a memory. The memories begot tendencies, and the tendencies begot drives, and the drives begot curiosity. These dark beasts roamed the night sky, driven to increase their access to thoughts by propelling themselves towards warmth, the energy needed to evolve and feed their curiosity. Like a bacterium invading a more advanced cell, they would enter a solar system and feed off of its heat, sometimes forming themselves into a moon or a planet. Protagora's sleeping beauty mind had evolved in a fashion similar to that of a black cloud, as it latched onto and parsed the waves passing through her synapses. Through whatever accident of nature, her favorite wavelengths were also those favored by a large black cloud approaching the earth. I'll stop there. It's a bit more posted, but thank you for watching. Please tune in for my next videos and have a good day.